From Bicycle to a Billion Dreams, the inspiring history of ISRO and its 11 landmark milestones. ISRO just made history with Chandrayaan 2, launching a rover on board its second mission to the moon. The Indian Space Research Organization has come a long way from its early days. It may surprise some of you to know that ISRO was actually formed way back in 1962. The Indian National Committee for Space Research, as it was then called, was formed under the leadership of Vikram Sarabhai and physicist Kalpathy Ramakrishna Ramanathan. At the time they had no resources to speak of, a small pool of scientists, and barely any funding. In fact, for the first rocket they launched a year later, they were transporting the parts to be assembled by bicycle. And now, more than 50 years later, we're launching rockets to the moon, Mars, and beyond. 1. India launches its first rocket. It was just a year after INCOSPER was formed, in 1963, that India launched its first rocket into space. The sounding rocket, meant for probing the upper atmosphere, was launched from the Thumba Equatorial Rocket Launching Station in the fishing village of Thumba, Kerala, now known as the Vikram Sarabhai Space Center. Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, who was on the rocket launch team at the time, describes how INCOSPER had to acquire land from a local church and relocate the villages before preparations could begin. Then, they were moving rocket components to the launch pad via bicycle. Finally, on November 21, 1963, they launched the rocket in the presence of eminent scientists like Dr. Homi Bhabha. 2. First satellite launch. The Aryabhata spacecraft, named after the famous Indian astronomer, was India's first satellite ever launched. Though it was completely designed and fabricated in India, it was launched on board the Soviet Cosmos 3M rocket on April 19, 1975. 3. First Indian-made rocket launch by ISRO. Where the Nike Apache rocket launched in 1963 was supplied by NASA, ISRO went on to build its first launch vehicle, the Satellite Launch Vehicle 3, PSLV-3. It was our first experimental satellite launch vehicle, a solid 4-stage rocket weighing 17 tons, and capable of placing 40 kg glass payloads in low Earth orbit. It was launched on July 18, 1980 from the Sriharikota range, with the Rohini satellite 1 rupee on board. This officially made us the 6th nation to independently put an indigenously made vehicle into space. 4. ISRO testing satellites with Bullock carts. By 1981, ISRO had its first indigenous satellite to launch, the Ariane passenger payload experiment, Apple, an experimental communication satellite. In order to test it for electromagnetic cleanliness, ISRO had to make do with a makeshift test facility mounted on a Bullock cart. 5. Sending first Indian citizen in space. Indian astronaut Rakesh Sharma was part of a joint manned mission between India and the Soviet Union. Back in 1984, he spent 8 days on board the Russian space station Salyut 7, making him the only Indian national to date to ever go to space. 6. ISRO's PSLV makes its debut. The modern-day ISRO workhorse, the Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle, made its first flight in 1997. Since then, versions of the rocket have been used to put all kinds of satellites into orbit. 7. Juggling Satellites. In 1999, the PSLV launched for orbit with 3 different satellites on board, 1 Indian, 1 Korean, and 1 German. It was the first time we'd ever launched more than one satellite at a time. 8. First launch of ISRO's GSLV. In 2001, we saw the Geosynchronous Satellite Launch Vehicle, GSLV, launch for the first time, 18 years before it took our satellite to the moon for the second time. 9. Recovering a launch for the first time. In 2007, we launched the Space Capsule Recovery Experiment, SRE-1, for the first time. It was a capsule containing experiments that would be performed in microgravity, before being returned to Earth and recovered. The mission provided valuable experience in navigation, guidance and control during the re-entry phase, provided us a chance to develop reusable thermal protection systems, TPS, and basically start us on the path towards reusable launch vehicles. 10. ISROs Moonshot. In 2008, ISRO pulled off its biggest achievement yet, getting a satellite into orbit around the moon during the Chandrayaan 1 mission. That eventually led to a path-breaking discovery of water on the moon. 11. India's mission to Mars. 5 years later, in 2013, ISRO looked even further to Mars. The space agency launched the Mangalyaan Mars Orbiter mission, finally inserting it into Martian orbit in 2014, from where it's been streaming data ever since. And now with Chandrayaan 2, ISRO has put another feather in its illustrious cap, showing the world how to launch rockets in space on a tight budget. And giving a nation of over a billion people a reason to believe that anything is possible. Chandrayaan 3, Indian Space Agency achieves historic moon mission landing. On Wednesday, India joined the United States, Russia and China as one of the only nations on Earth to navigate its technology onto the surface of the moon. Perhaps even more impressive, the Indian mission known as Chandrayaan 3 managed to land its rover in the southern polar region, the first country to do so without crashing. Indeed, that's exactly what happened with Chandrayaan 2 in 2019, the mission previous to this one. It was the second lunar space mission in the Indian Space Research Organization's Chandrayaan program, which lost control and destroyed itself on the moon following a software glitch. The successful Chandrayaan 3 mission included 2 spacecrafts, a lander named Vikram and a rover named Pragyan. In addition to being an important accomplishment for the Indian scientific community, the mission also moves humanity closer to its goal of creating a lunar colony. Landing on the South Pole, or near it, is really important because it's the sort of area we'd be looking for a lunar base, Ian Whittaker, a senior lecturer in physics at Nottingham Trent University, told Al Jazeera. There's water there, which was one of the findings of Chandrayaan 1. This water can be used for a lot of things. We could also look for building materials. Chandrayaan 3's success occurs shortly after a less successful moment in moon science news. Earlier this month, Luna 25, the first Russian spacecraft to be sent to the moon in decades, crashed into the lunar surface after the scientists controlling it lost communication. Although never directly landing anything on the moon, Israel once had a spacecraft filled with microscopic organisms called tardigrades explode near the moon, potentially showering it with them.